Hi, everyone. Welcome. As everyone's signing in, we'll get started in just a few minutes. But welcome to the Muskoka Library's virtual event with Kate Quinn.
So we don't sit here with an awkward silence while people are logging in. Could I tell a funny story?
Absolutely.
So the fun part that happened was that right back in spring 2020, when everybody was still getting used to Zoom, we had no idea how to work this, weird new online service yet. I was on a panel with a bunch of authors, and for some author event, and we all log in to what are we assured is a virtual green room, and we're sitting in there sort of waiting for the event to begin, as the last few minutes are ticking down. And of course, we're all bitching about our deadlines and about how copy edits and about absolutely everything under the sun. And then we actually realized later, once we log in, that everybody who was logged in early had been able to listen to us. So that was, I always thought, was one of the funny Zoom stories from the early Wild West days when nobody knew how to Zoom. Because I remember thinking, like, boy, you got like 5 authors totally unvarnished opinion with swearing about exactly what we think about copy edits and deadlines that hit, and deadlines and edits that hit your desk on the day before Christmas.
Oh my goodness. I'm sure everyone loved it though.
Whoops.
They're like, ooh, the gossip, the secret life of writers.
Yeah, so that was funny. I haven't had anything like that happen quite so far. But on the other hand, I do feel like at the beginning, when we were all learning to Zoom, that it was a little bit more of a feeling of, it's like, I will be professional. Not anybody will know that there is a hint of a personal life beyond this screen. No one will know. And then nowadays, everybody's like, yeah, so my cat just walked across the keyboard and flashed its butt at the screen. And, my 2-year-old is playing bongo drums on my head. So why don't we go to the next PowerPoint slide? So really, I can't guarantee there won't be dogs barking, but, that's par for the course.
Yeah.
We'll
I
always
think,
laugh.
yeah, definitely. I think we're all a little embarrassed at the beginning, and now we just realize that's life.
Although, to the person who said, hopefully you were all wearing pants, yes. But I will say there was a funny thing as the military learned to Zoom as well. I am throwing my husband under the bus here. He's active duty Navy. He won't mind. He gets it all the time. But they were learning to Zoom too. And you would have to muster. So I had the funny sight of seeing my husband mustering up in front of a Zoom screen, in which they would make sure that everybody was in uniform. But the thing is, they're not making everybody stand up and like pan down, like to show how shiny your boots are. So they were all, of course, literally I walk in and there's him in his like uniform blouse and, boxers below. And that's what everybody's doing. They just woke up. And of course, inevitably, at some point, he was on a Zoom where it was not him, but somebody on the other side spilled coffee in their lap, and there is a sudden yelp as somebody leaps out of their seat, and the entire Zoom is treated to the sight of somebody's, like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer boxer shorts, very non-regulation underneath the digicam uniform blouse. So even the military is not necessarily exempt from this whole thing of, the Zoom outfit of, professional on top and party on the bottom, or PJs on the bottom.
Mm-hmm. That's the one great thing about these Zoom webinars is everyone at home can be wearing whatever they want to because we can't see them. So you're safe.
Yeah, I can tell you it is all yoga pants covered in dog hair below this very nice what I call my Zoom shrug. So underneath that, yeah, it's the yoga pants and dog hair all the way.
Amazing. All right, so I see that some people have found the chat, so that's great. If you want to send a message, if you want to say hello, where you're from. We have some people from the States joining us. We have some people from Muskoka and all over, so you can say hello in the chat. If you have a question for our wonderful author today, oh, and from BC, hello. If you have a question, you can ask it in the Q&A down there. So at the end of the night, we will be having a Q&A session. So if you have a question for the author, if you have something that you want to know, please pop it in the Q&A and not in the chat, because we'll be going through the Q&A at the end. We do have some poll questions as well as we go. So I'm going to launch our first one while I do a couple more house cleaning things, and you will be able to answer that. So the first question is, have you ever read a book by Kate Quinn?
It's totally fine if the answer is no. This is not school. I'm not going to quiz you afterward or even give you like the disappointed look. It's totally good.
But that's exciting. If you haven't and you're just excited about it, we're also excited to see you here. So
can I answer the poll?
Absolutely.
I'm kind of tempted to answer no, just because, it's like, I don't know, by the end, I kind of feel like, I'm not sure if I have read it. I'm way too burned out to actually be able to tell you what any of the characters have actually done.
Like the final copy.
Okay, respect for the scientific process. I'm not going to answer. That might skew the data. Not a good thing, but.
All right. So of course, today we are talking to Kate Quinn about her new book, The Diamond Eye. I will let everyone know we are not going to have a Muskoka Library's author event in May, but in June on the 7th, we are doing something a little bit different. And I have my homework cut out for me because we have 2 authors coming. So June 7th. Prepare for that. And then we have another author at the end of June as well to make up for not having one in May. So be sure to sign those up, follow your library on social media, sign up for your library's newsletter. And before we get started, also, I would like to acknowledge that the land that we are in Muskoka, is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, specifically the Chippewa and the Ojibwe peoples, and the Algonquin. And we also recognize the Mohawks who relocated to Muskoka in 1881, the Williams Treaty of 1923, and the J. Collins Land Purchase of 1785 cover the territory that we live in. We recognize the historic and present contributions to our province and our country of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. So I think we have over 100 people for this Zoom webinar, and we are so excited. The questions are already coming in. But first we have to introduce Kate Quinn. So let's look at our poll. I mean, 94% of you have read her books before, so you know what's going on, but it looks like 6% of you have never read a book by her. So maybe you are new to all of this. Welcome. For those of you who don't know, Kate Quinn is the New York Times and US Today bestselling author of historical fiction. She has some series, she has some standalone books. Her books, The Alice Network, The Huntress, and The Rose Code, have been super popular with the libraries. You can find them at your local library, or I'm sure you can buy them at the bookstore. And if you would like a copy of The Diamond Eye after tonight, you can get a great deal on it from your local library. You just put your name to your library, call them usually before noon tomorrow, and we are going to pre-order them, and you get them with a signed book plate. So it's amazing. And honestly, we get them from the publishers, so you get a pretty good deal on them. So make sure that you order the book at the end of the night. All of her books have been translated into multiple languages. If you read the audiobooks or the print books, they're amazing. So make sure you can check them out. And she lives in San Diego, so she's enjoying some nice California weather. Well, we have kind of a chilly day up here. So welcome, Kate, virtually to Muskoka. And can you tell us about your new book, The Diamond Eye?
Thank you very much, first of all, for a lovely intro, and hello, everybody. Thank you for logging in when you have so many other things to do. I'm always appreciative of that. This novel, The Diamond Eye, tells the story of a fascinating real-life woman from Ukraine, a single mother, a graduate student, a library researcher, whose life was upended when Hitler invaded her homeland, and who ended up becoming the most effective female sniper of all time that we know of. She racked up a tally of 309 enemy invaders on the battlefield. She was sent to the United States on a goodwill tour in 1941. She became America's sweetheart and close friends with Eleanor Roosevelt, of all people. Her story is real. Her name is Lyudmila Pavlichenko. She would absolutely be on the barricades defending Ukraine if she were alive today. And she is the heroine of the Diamond Eye.
How did you first come across her? Because she's not very well known. I took a history course on Soviet Russia, and her name popped up just once. But how did you find out about her?
Well, it really came up, as quite often happens. You find the idea for one book when you are researching another. And when I was researching the book, The Huntress, which was just before my last book, my previous book, The Rose Code, I happened to be reading quite a bit about Soviet women war heroines, because there was a great deal in that book about the Night Witches, which is the all-female regiment of night bomber pilots that flew against Hitler's Eastern Front. And so while I'm reading about the Night Witches, suddenly I was getting all kinds of information about other Soviet women war heroines. And that's because the Soviet Union was the only allied nation that put women into active combat. In all the other allied nations, if women fought, it was either as partisan fighting, or it was in espionage, or it was home front support. And I'm not knocking any of those things or their importance, but it was the USSR was the only nation that literally allowed women to pick up guns, to get into the cockpits of fighter planes and bomber planes, to drive tanks, and to actually fire sniper rifles. So when I was reading about the Night Witches, I also read about Lyudmila Pavlichenko, and everything about her history was just, astounding. My jaw really hit the floor there, and I just decided, I can't put her in this book. She will not fit, but I am tucking her in my back pocket for later. Absolutely, because that story is too good not to be told. So I did tuck her in my back pocket, and I ended up writing The Rose Code first after The Huntress. But then after that, I decided, I think it's time for her story, and I ended up writing it over the end of 2020 and the beginning of 2021.
Yeah, I loved how different it is in USSR Russia at the time, because so many different things were happening for women, and they had a totally different attitude towards women, not only with how they were fighting, but also things like divorce and marriage and clothing and all that kind of stuff. So that was really interesting to hear those two different attitudes, especially when she went to the States.
Well, it was interesting when you're talking about the Soviet Union. The ideals were good in the beginning because, Lenin really did have some very progressive ideas about how women should be equal with men. And really, he did want to promote, the idea that, Russian women can be equal with men in a way that women in the West were definitely not experiencing. Now, the trouble with that, of course, is that, you don't always practice what you preach. And certainly the Soviets did not. So it would be facile to say that, someone like Lyudmila got absolute equality. She got a lot more equality in some ways than, her counterparts in the West would have. She was allowed to be in the military. She had a better access. She had an easier access to some parts of education than women in the West would have. Women were definitely welcomed and, more able to walk through the doors into jobs of engineering or the military, or to be doctors or surgeons and so forth. But did they experience true equality? I would say absolutely not. It tended to be more the thing for Russian women of, yes, we will welcome you into a man's world, feel free to get a man's job, but then go home and do the women's jobs too. Because generally speaking, and almost every Russian woman I have ever interviewed has told me this, Russian men were not exactly rushing to pick up the burden of, yes, honey, let me look after the children and do the housework. Well, because you're doing a job that's just as important as mine. It's more like, thank goodness you're home. The children need home from your job as a structural engineer or a high profile surgeon. The children need to be fed, and I need my dinner. And so the Russian women did really have a little bit of a hard time in that way. But on the flip side, it did mean that the kind of equality that they did have, did lead someone like Mila to be quite surprised when she came to the United States and was looking around and really seeing the kinds of opportunities she had as limited as, we might think they are nowadays. are still not things that women in the West were for the most part seeing. So it's a different kind of, you can't say it's true equality, it's different. Anything is going to be, often not quite what you think when you research it, but definitely made for a different world. And I really did enjoy exploring that.
We have another quick little poll just to see if anyone has ever heard about her before, because that would be interesting to know. When you were doing research for the book, was there anything that really surprised you when you were finding out about her life or about the Russian army at that time?
Well, the thing that really surprised me the most was, just how warm and relatable a person she seemed to be. Because, when I first heard about, okay, it's a woman who literally earned the nickname Lady Death, and she dispatched over 300 official, enemy invaders, which is more than, really most serial killers put together. So you end up thinking that is going to be, a cold, icy razor of a human being, right? And no, it was not the answer at all. And, the reason I was able to really figure that is because Ludmilla wrote her memoir later in life. And so she really comes across so vividly in those pages. And what came across ironically much more than, some sort of, icy Soviet superwoman, villainess from, a Bond movie. Rather than that, I was getting, of all things, a book nerd. That was what I got from her, because, she was a girl who grew up, she was a bookworm, as well as enjoying sports and running with the boys for games. She wanted to be a historian. She went to school. She, was working on an unbelievably nerdy history dissertation at the time when, the Hitler invaded Ukraine. She she was working as a researcher in the Odessa Public Library, finishing her grad degree. And I just thought, okay, this is the final proof, if we ever needed it, that you don't underestimate librarians and what they can do. But it was, the thing that really came across to me was this warmth that she had, that she was what I would think of as an extroverted introvert. Like, she's the kind of person, a lot of writers are like this. They can be the life of the party when they're there, but then they kind of have to withdraw after a while and sort of like refill that well and get a little bit of quiet time alone. She was someone who loved books, who could absolutely geek out over archaeological findings, or, a new novel, or, just a new subject for a paper. She was that type of student who probably had, color coordinated highlighters and binder tabs. And, that to me made her so much more relatable than any kind of, that I was ever anticipating. And I really ended up thinking, it's like, this woman is not so different from any that we would see. She's like, rather than being someone we think of as like, this is someone whose experience in life is nothing like mine. Before the war, she would have been the kind of superheroine that we already see in an ordinary life every day. She's that young mom, sitting on the side of, a playground, watching her son run around, and get some exercise. And at the same time, she's going over her notes for night school. And she's doing all this on not nearly enough sleep. And she's somehow making it happen anyway. And that, to me, makes her kind of a superheroine and a superwoman in her own right there before she ever, went to war, which really just then makes me end up thinking, if this woman, this quiet bookworm who was a single mother and a library researcher, had this, when she was put into the crucible and put to the test, had this incredible capability inside her, discovered that she had a warrior inside, we all carry the same possibility. And it always ended up making me think, what do we all have? What will we all be inside us? What will we all do if we were put to the same kind of test she was? I really hope we never are, because she went through unbelievable hardships. But it does make you think, what am I capable of if that's what she was capable of? This very ordinary woman and extraordinary woman at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. I'll just show the results. So out of over 100 people who answered, only 2 people have actually heard of her before. So it's
nice.
kind of fun that people get to learn about this absolutely amazing woman. One thing in your book is that she seemed really tenacious, but she was really focused on perfectionism. Is that something that was in her memoir?
Well, it was one of my ways in which I was trying to think, how is it that I can make this woman with her extraordinary life accessible and relatable to the ordinary woman who's going to be reading this book? And I count myself in that too. Like, how do I find her relatable? And the thing that I ended up thinking about was, anybody here seen Encanto, the movie? I mean, if you've got kids or grandkids, I'm sure it's a few hundred times by now. There's that great song in there called Surface Pressure, where the woman is singing about the incredible pressure of trying to perform and to bear up under the weight of family expectations and family history, and to be strong for the people she loves. And I don't know a woman out there, myself included, who did not take that song like a dagger to the heart. And the thing is that perfectionism is one of those things that a sniper has to really care about, because just this much could end up being a miss. And that could end up being the difference between life and death. You have to be a perfectionist to be a sharpshooter. But the thing is that I ended up thinking, the thing is, women are already perfectionists. So many of us, and we never let ourselves off the hook. We're so bad at that. And the whole idea is that women can be so hard on themselves. So there's so much pressure to be perfect, or at least keep up these very, very high standards that society sets for us, and that often we set for ourselves, to be perfect for our families, perfect moms, perfect wives, perfect partners, perfect, people at work. We got to be breaking that glass ceiling and be there for our kids at the PTA meetings and bringing the muffins, and we got to be perfect for the perfect partner and the perfect friend who's always there to listen and support. And we got to keep the house clean, and we got to, there's so much that we have to do, or maybe we don't have to do it. Maybe sometimes that pressure comes more from us than from anyone else, but we subject ourselves to it, and the world subjects us to it. And so that's what made me think that, it's already actually been proven that women actually tend to make better sharpshooters than men. Part of me wondered, and that's in the modern military, when there's more data to analyze than there was in Ludmilla's day. But it made me wonder, is that why? Because women are already perfectionists. We're already think, oh, I was off by a quarter inch, total failure. You're going to kick yourself for the rest of the day about that. And I thought, this woman, I have a feeling it's like, if I want to make her accessible, I don't think it's at all unlikely that she already walked into her training as a sniper, with an attitude of, I can't mess this up ever. And we know this because we know part of this, we're can extrapolate, because, she had one massive mistake in her life already, which was that she was a teen mom. She was made pregnant when she was only about 15 years old, which could have derailed her entire life. It did in a lot of ways. If she hadn't had supportive parents who were willing to, help her look after her baby when the baby's father and her husband literally walked out on them within a matter of weeks, because he decided, being a husband and father just wasn't for him. So off he went. And this teenage girl, 15, 16 years old, has to rebuild her life from that. And she did. She had a full-time job in a factory. She got her night school degree. She raised her son and loved him. And at the same time, though, she must have been thinking, that nearly tumbled your life off its tracks. I can't do that again. I have to be, perfect. I have to never stray off that road. And so I thought that would be a very logical thing for a woman to think. And then what happens when you carry that attitude that you already have into something like sharpshooting, which just dials that to a 10 and makes you even more determined. I can never miss. I can never be anything less than perfect, because then I might die. You carry that into there, and it makes her, at least in my version, it makes her a tremendously effective sniper. But at the same time, it means that she's constantly living with impossibly high standards. And in the end of this book, it's not only about, will she survive? Will she be a great sniper? Will she, be able to survive her war? It's also about, can she find happiness? And part of that finding happiness is going to be having to re-examine the idea, which maybe is toxic, that this perfectionism has to rule your life. And I think all of us, as women, have had to have some idea that maybe you have to examine, okay, I have to put down some of this burden or I'm going to crack. And maybe if I do, the world won't actually fall apart. If I, am not absolutely 100% perfect at every single thing I've told myself that I must be. And that's the question that even the best sniper in recorded history has to ask herself. So I'm sorry, a little bit long answer, but I love delving into into character flaws and, emotions and all of that. It's what I really live for.
And that's the amazing thing, because she's such an interesting character, and she has a memoir out there, but no people here, as you can tell, they just don't know about her. So it's great that you've written this book, and now people can learn about her. And it's so enjoyable. So I hope everyone goes home and reads it after this.
Yeah, the memoir is very readable. She's
Mhm.
less, it's a little bit less long in emotion because, Soviet memoirs do not tend to be super gushy about emotions, but at the same time, it's super readable. There's so much in there that's quotable. Her personality really shines, even when you can see sort of like the Soviet propaganda that's sort of sitting on it, like a little bit like a fence. You can see her through that just fine. So I encourage you, go look for it. It's a lot of fun to read. And
I
it is
love,
translated into English.
yes. At the start of the chapters, you'd have a little bit of a memoir, and they had kind of like the official memoir and the unofficial memoir. Was it difficult to find facts about her, or was there some things that were missing from her story that you really had to get to just because of secrecy? And Russia's known for secrecy.
Well, in the memoir was such a huge benefit to me because I had this woman's words in her own language about her own experiences. But at the same time, I did also have to realize that for one thing, this is a Soviet memoir, which means the censors would have been very firm about things that were put in and things that would have been taken out. And as I said earlier, you have sort of like the Soviet propaganda sitting like a fence on that, and you can see plenty through it. But I do have to make judgment calls about sometimes things that might have been in there for propaganda or things that maybe were taken out for propaganda, like the fact that she never mentions the fact that she would have seen soldiers in her regiment being shot by their own officers if they retreated even a few steps because of Stalin's not one step back order, which was horrendous. She would have absolutely seen that. Would Soviet censors have allowed her to say that she saw that on the front line? Absolutely not. So that's the kind of thing that I put in the book because I know it's there, it's verifiable. On the other hand, there are things that are sometimes put in, like there was a moment in her memoir where they describe a meeting with Stalin. And I made the judgment call that that probably didn't happen because we have writings from the other people who were there in that room, according to her bit in the memoir, and their writings don't mention that meeting. And they would have mentioned it because that's a big prestige thing for that day. So I think that didn't happen. I think that's a case of the Soviet office, the press office saying, please insert a flattering memoir to Comrade Stalin right here, please. And that's her probably saying, all right, here it goes. So I didn't put that in because that looked like a pretty good case of something that was inserted for propaganda reasons. And then also there's the fact that and the reason I did decide, ultimately that, I did the from the memoir officially and then the unofficial version is because I did want to say from the beginning that, Ludmila's memoir, as valuable as it is, does not tell the whole story, and to try to make that clear for anybody who is doing the reading of it. And, also that's partly not just because of the Soviet censors, but also simply because nobody tells the whole story, even when you're telling a memoir that you want to put out to the world. For example, in her memoir, she says very little about her first husband, that man who fathered her child and then walked out on her and was never really regularly a part of their lives afterward. She says almost nothing about him. The thing that she did say, which I found very telling, is when she says, fortunately, my son is nothing like his father. And I thought, wow, there is a world behind that one word, fortunately. And I thought, I know why she didn't say anything more about him. Even if he was a bigger part of her life, she didn't want to give him the page space in her life after she was dead that he had in her life when she was alive. And wouldn't any of us make that decision if we had a really toxic ex? We don't want to talk about them for posterity. You want to brush them under the rug. So I decided to give him a bigger role in this book because there's very good reason for her to leave him out, even if he had had a bigger role. And also, we simply don't know what became of him. So that meant I had a little free reign to invent this man, who he was a little bit, and what might have happened to him, because that is something that history left blank. So you also look for the places where history leaves gaps, and you see, where can you play a little bit in those gaps? Because the nice thing about being a novelist is you have to make a choice about these things. A nonfiction writer has the leniency of being able to say, we don't know what happened to blank, but we can surmise that perhaps blank. A novelist can't just say, we don't know. A novelist has to say, well, you have to come down on one side or another, and then you have to decide. So sometimes you decide, and you tell this what will make it a better story.
I think that's one thing that I found surprising. I was watching another one of your author talks, and after reading the author's note, is I think I expected a lot more to be on more of the fiction kind of creative license side. But I mean, she's so fascinating that there's so many things that I was like, oh, that had to be made up. And I'm like, no, that's real. That's what actually happened. So
Often the craziest things are the things that I did not make up. And that usually is the case of historical fiction, because the stuff that seems the most nuts, that's the kind of thing an author would not dare fictionalize or make up. We just don't dare. But the stuff that seems the weirdest, that's often the stranger than fiction is real life part.
yeah. Kind of a different path. There's a lot of technical writing about sharpshooting and about snipers. Did you try any? Did you talk to your husband and his friends? How did you find out this kind of detailed information?
I couldn't do nearly as much as I would like. And that's just simply because we were in lockdown, and, there just wasn't any going anywhere. But I do actually I've done some shooting before, and I do actually own a Mosin Nagant rifle with PE sights, which is what Ludmilla would have done most of her work with. So I got a lot just from being able to heft the damn thing. It is heavy. And, I got so much from like, all right, this is heavy. And like, you can see how big the rounds are, like the kind of damage that would have done to human flesh. And you can see just like the way that the bolt works, it would be very easy to operate with your hands were in heavy gloves. It's very simple, which is honestly very good. If you're on the front lines, and especially if it's a Russian winter, believe me, you want simple, you are wearing gloves. So I got a lot from that. And I was able to learn a lot as far as the shooting went. Partially my husband, partially also some really gifted beta readers who are far bigger gun experts than I will ever be. And also, again, from Ludmilla's memoir, because that's the place where really her own voice pops and is very, very clear, is when she talks about specificities. And she's very clear about things, like, well, I like the Mosin Nagant better than a Sveta because it doesn't have a muzzle flash. And I like, I personalize a weapon for me, so that it actually is personalized, because I have to do specialty work rather than just a regular soldier firing blind, which is why one of the romantic gestures a man in her life makes for her is that he personalizes her new weapon for her when she needs a new one, because he knows exactly how she likes it. And these are the things that came out of her memoir, a lot of them anyway. And I was very fortunate that she was really quite specific about the little technical things, because frankly, there are a lot of gun guys out there who know their technicalities, and I really did not want them coming at me, adding me on Twitter. So I was like, I am getting this right, because I do not want any reviews that say this is why women shouldn't write books about guns.
No, I thought it was great. And that's one of we won't spoil it. There's one scene, and she visits a gun club when she's in America, and they're like, oh, she's not the real thing. And then she just spouts off this technical information. But it was great, because the technical information, for people at home who are like, oh no, technical, there's not a lot, but there's enough of it that it's just, you really appreciate who she is and the work that she did, because it's crazy.
Well, it's the thing of, I tend to think of the place where a writer wants to get to when you have a character who's a real technical expert in something. You can't spout off so much that you lose the reader, and you lose sight of the plot and the forward motion of the story. But you kind of you aim for that place where, like when you're watching an action movie and there's like the hero's number 2 guy who's the tech expert, who will go on some sort of long rant about this is where we find the bad guys because this is where the triangulation of the drone goes, or whatever his expertise level is, or this is where the scientist talks for like 30 seconds and everybody's just like, I don't know, but okay, let's go there. It's that feeling of when you get when you know that you don't necessarily understand what this person is doing, but you can sense the air of expertise about them, and you know that they know what they're doing. So that's really kind of what you aim for as a writer, is you put in just enough technical details so that the reader maybe doesn't know yourself what it is, but you know that the character does, and that's enough for you to go on with understanding that they are the expert in this scenario.
We have a huge writing group in Muskoka, and since you're the expert now that we have, can you tell us a little bit about your writing process for these books?
I do a lot of outlining. I do more with each book that I write, mainly because I am trying to get away from my natural process, which is that I massively overwrite my rough drafts, and then I get to the end and then I realize I've got 60,000 words, and that's not fun. So I'm trying to get to the point where I am outlining more with every book, which means hopefully a tighter first draft and less overwriting, which then I need to throw out. So I do a lot of pre-writing and a lot of outlining. I do some months of research before I even start drafting, just when I am sort of laying out my big pool of facts and I'm molding the story around them. And then I draft and I bang out a draft as fast as I can. I always go back every day I write, and then the next day I'll go over what I wrote the day before and sort of smooth that out and then keep going. And that's generally how I draft. And then I really do a lot of the work in revision. I always show my rough draft to a couple of very trusted critique partners before I then go anywhere else with it. They generally give me the big picture stuff, and I fix that before my editor even sees it. And then my editor gets that draft. And then after that, there's another 3 or 4 rounds. And generally I do a lot of editing because that's where you're finally catching everything that you couldn't stop and research, or you couldn't stop and do the first time or the second time through. So that's pretty much what I do. And I almost always have a couple books going at once. I might be drafting one, but then I'll have to stop and do edits on another one. And that's just pretty much the way the deadline cycle is. So there's always a bunch of books sort of in various stages going on in my cycle at any given time.
Are there any hints that you can give us about what's coming up next?
Well, right now I am working on what it should be. I think should be the next book. We'll see. It's titled The Briar Club, and it is about an all-female boarding house in Washington, D.C. in the early 1950s. So we're talking the Red Scare, McCarthyism, early years of the Cold War, all of that, juicy, gritty stuff that is, frankly, really good grist for a novel. So I'm really enjoying that. It's a little bit different. It's a lot of fun.
Is there something that draws you to these historical fiction books instead of another genre in particular?
I think it might just simply be because my mom had a degree in ancient and medieval history. So when I was young, I was, getting stories about the past, as, bedtime stories instead of fairy tales. And that's just where I naturally gravitated when I ended up writing stories of my own. I did notice in one of the Q&As, if someone was asked, one of the questions there, someone asked, would I write about modern conflicts? And I'm honestly not sure I ever would, just because I'm drawn to the past because it's a bit of an escape from the present that I live in. About the closest I've done to a modern conflict is I have a sort of a novella / short story I am working on to put out hopefully later this year, which has half of it takes place in World War II era and half does take place in the modern era. But that's about as close as I've ever gotten. And I normally speaking, I would rather stay in the past when I write. It just tends to be where my interest lies.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, and that is, we have some questions coming in the Q&A, so that's wonderful. If you have more questions, then please pop them in. We do have one question that is really timely about the Ukraine right now, because that's something that's in a lot of our minds. Marlene asked, are you seeing anything that you learned about Ukraine in your research playing out in these past events? And from what I understand, she was Ukrainian, but she didn't necessarily call herself Ukrainian.
Well, it is a little bit of an elephant in the room with this book, and it's a little bit of a dicey thing to think about and talk about. But I'm glad we are. I'm very glad we are. The thing is that this was a point in history when Ukraine was unhappily, for a great many Ukrainians, belonging under the umbrella of the Soviet Union. They were not happy about this in a lot of ways, especially the more rural areas, because Ukraine suffered tremendously under the famines in Stalin, that Stalin, for the most part, deliberately instilled. There is a lot there that is, horrendous history, millions of deaths. But at the same time, it was part of the Soviet Union. And Mila, although she was Ukrainian born, she was born in the Kiev region and grew up there. Her father was Russian, and he was very much a believer in he was a party member, a believer in the system, and that's how he raised her. So it would not have been strange to her for her to, believe in the overarching, Soviet system, because that's what she would have lived with in her home. So she did think of herself as Soviet, as Russian, and as well as Ukrainian, and she, thought of herself as Soviet first. Yet at the same time, she was Ukrainian born. All of her fighting was done on Ukrainian soil in defense of Ukrainian civilians. Her fighting was done in the defense of Odessa and then in defense of the siege of Sevastopol. So this is Ukrainian territory, and it is very clear from her writing how much she loves her land and her homeland. And so, really, since this was a matter of invasion for her, it was not a matter of policy or political spectrum. It was a matter of Hitler's forces are invading hugely, not just nibbling around the edge of your country. They are driving right for the heart, and they are looking to take everything over. And it was very clear that Hitler's policy toward Russians and Ukrainians was that they were racial undesirables who were only deserved to be pushed down and pushed out in room for Germans. And it was very clear as well that, Russian POWs received the worst treatment of any of the POWs in German prisoner camps. They would be routinely starved or, systematically worked to death rather than treated with any kind of, actual gentility that the Red Cross or the rules of war would deem more advisable, as the French and the French and American and British soldiers were more likely to be treated. So for Mila, it would have been very simple. It would have just been, we need to resist, because if we don't resist this invasion that is pouring in right now, my country is going under the swastika. My son will grow up in the Hitler Youth learning how to Sig Heil, and that is not acceptable to me. So it really was as simple as that when it comes down to her fight. It was a simple fight to resist an invader. And I really do believe, honestly, that if she had lived today, she would be doing another very simple fight against an invasion. This time it would be against Russians. There actually is a woman who is being lauded right now in Ukrainian headlines. We don't know her name because of security reasons or her face, but it is a female sharpshooter who is being called the new Lady Death. She goes by the call sign of Charcoal, and she is on record as saying, "I will fight to the last." And if there's anything that I have really, rejoiced about, it's the fact that Ukraine has very much embraced Lyudmila Pavlichenko as one of their own. They will, and if you don't believe me, look up any article about her online. They always have a title like Russian female sniper of World War II. You go down the list of comments underneath, you will always find the comment, she was Ukrainian, not Russian. So she's a Ukrainian war heroine to them. And I'm very glad they have embraced her. And I do think that her fight would be with them if she was alive today.
Yeah, I think we've definitely seen that with so many people of different occupations joining in to take up arms. Oh, and someone says, "I see your sunflower," and they gave you a thumbs up.
Yep.
Wonderful. Now, so we're getting close to question time. So I'm just going to remind people, if you have questions, please pop them in. If people haven't read your books before, so we did have some people who haven't read any of your books, where should they start other than, buying this book from their local library and starting with this? But I mean, where would you start?
I think it would depend on your flavor of history or your flavor of female badass. If you love ancient Rome, go with badass female Roman empresses, and start with, I'd say, Mistress of Rome. That's probably my first one there, first book I did publish. And that has a woman who is, a slave in Rome who falls in love with a gladiator and is trying very, very hard to survive in the reign of a deeply crazy emperor. If you like the Italian Renaissance, go with The Serpent and the Pearl. That has a woman who was tough enough and canny enough to survive the entire reign of the Borgia Pope and his family. We all know about them. I would, if you want female spies, the Alice Network. Women bomber pilots, go with The Huntress. If you like code breakers, go with the Rose Code. So it really just sort of depends on what your taste is, what your flavor is that you prefer, and go with that.
One thing I've really loved about your books is there's so much action as well. So I know a lot of people come in to the library and they see a historical fiction book with a women writer about a female character, and they kind of dismiss it as like a woman's book. But honestly, there's so much interesting things and so many great facts and so much action and so many things happening. I mean, there's usually a little bit of like a romance story, but it's not like the focus of the romance story. It's just about these amazing historical women. So, ladies and gents and everyone else, check it out. Let's look at some of the questions. Here's one from Andrea. She says, "Hi, Kate. What are you reading for pleasure, not research?"
Oh, that's a fun one. Let's see. I have recently read the new Jeannie Lin, Red Blossom and Snow. That is her series of romances set in Tang Dynasty China. I love Bonnie Garmus's Lessons in Chemistry debut novel, fantastically good. I was laughing like every other paragraph. I love Guy Gabriel Kay. I'm sort of working my way through his backlist. I did a reread of Adriana Trigiani's Big Stone Gap lately. It put a big smile on my face, just like it did the first time. And let's see what else. I just also finished up my last book that I read when I was sort of on vacation was Sarah Vaughan's Anatomy of a Scandal, which was not only a really good British political thriller, but also is a series on Netflix right now. And I actually also just finished the series on Netflix, which is also very good. So I recommend both.
Wonderful. Jane asks where you prefer to write.
Really, I tend to prefer to write at home. I am lucky enough to be able to write at home full time. And so I tend to write in the afternoons after I'm done in the mornings with all my business stuff and with whatever errands and dog walking and all of that need to be done. So I ended up working on my couch with a lovely big window in front of me, so I at least get a little bit of sun there. I usually work with my laptop on a pillow in my lap and dogs piled up around me, and that tends to be my best working place.
That sounds amazing. We have an interesting question from John. He's wondering about those Russian working wives that we were talking about earlier. He says, when you're writing and in the groove, are you expected to cook supper and look after the kids and go shopping for groceries?
No, I am not. And that's why I am so appreciative, because I do not have kids, for one thing, only dogs. I walk dogs, but that's a pleasure. And that's something that I am often thinking about a book at the same time. So it works out well. But I'm very appreciative of, and I'm in awe of the women I know who are writing moms, because it is a really hard thing to juggle. I think one of the reasons I always joke to my friends who are moms that I think one of the reasons I do not have kids is that it would not be a pretty sight around my deadline. I would probably be shoving the kids out the front door with like a 20 in their pockets each and saying, "Mom's on deadline, go forage for yourselves. May the odds be ever in your favor. Come back on May 3rd when I push send," and, shut the bolt and off they go. And they're going to come back in 3 weeks, like completely feral and dressed in squirrel skins, and that's not good. So this is one of the reasons why I am limiting myself to dogs who do not need to be having problems with having to be ferried to soccer practice when you have a book that needs to come in within a week. My husband is great. He cooks. He cooks already. He's a great cook, and whenever I'm on deadline, he tends to sit me down and say, what do I need to do to give you time? Because I know you need time right now. Do you need me to do more around the house? Do you need me to do, are there errands I can do? What can I do? And I take advantage of that, and I'm very lucky. So because I am so lucky in all of that is the reason that I am very appreciative of the women who are juggling so much and also trying to put books out, because it's a tough thing to do.
Yeah, I think we're appreciative of that too, because then we can enjoy your books because they're amazing. Lynn says, Kate, I love your books. To me, they are the spoonful of sugar that makes the history go down.
Aw, thank you.
After reading one of your books, I always spend time searching on the internet.
Well, I think that's honestly the thing that is that the sorry, is there more question to that, or just
Oh, no, that was it. There wasn't a question. It was just
well, no, but I think that's the best thing that historical fiction does do, is that it should send you on a rabbit hole hunt, to look for more. And, ideally speaking, that's what you end up doing, is you find more, you want more books about it. You end up probably reading nonfiction if you're anything like me, because I end up going, fiction will pique my interest in something, and then I go dig up nonfiction to help me learn more about it. And that's why I end up, giving both fiction and nonfiction recommendations in the back of my books under the reading list, because I know that's what I love to see when I finish a book, because I want to know more if I'm really interested. So that's my goal whenever I do write historical fiction, is I hope you are motivated to go find more information about, something that has hopefully made you interested.
And I found that too. I was talking to my husband about the book, and he's like, oh, I just heard a podcast about her. So, there's tons of ways to learn more.
Well, and ideally too, historical fiction and fiction feed each other. It's a nice cyclical loop. Think about, for example, we have the musical Hamilton, which I think is a great piece of historical fiction, just in a different format than a novel. But we have the musical Hamilton because Lin-Manuel Miranda decided to go on vacation and read Chernow's biography, nonfiction biography of Hamilton on vacation. He decided to write a musical. Now we have people who are watching Hamilton and coming home and ordering Ron Chernow's biography of Hamilton, or maybe looking up a historical novel like Stephanie Dre and Laura Camoy's novel about Eliza Schuyler Hamilton and learning more that way. So you see, it all feeds itself in a nice little cyclical thing, historical fiction, nonfiction, and, other forms that include history.
Wonderful. We have a question, and I'm not going to say this name right, but the character of
Kostya.
Kostya, there we go. So Lorraine has gotten a jump on some people because looks like she's read the book. So the character of Kostya is so wonderfully written. How much of Kostya's character is fiction and how much is real life?
A lot of his actual personality was fictionalized because there was surprisingly little. And that's a case of something where I'm also trying to avoid spoilers here, but it's a case of something in the novel, in the memoir, where there was a gap. And the thing is that the more I learned about snipers, the more I realized the relationship between the partnership between a sniper and their partner, or sometimes called their lookout. It depends on the terminology, but those, snipers most often work in pairs, or they can work in big groups too, like a sniper and their support staff. That's more like what they do now. Back then, they didn't have the manpower for groups. So you had a sniper and a partner, and they were more likely to work together than, in anybody else. So I was looking at that and thinking that is about as close and intimate a working relationship as anyone could have, and not just a working relationship. Mila even says in the course of this book, it's like, I have to trust my partner more than I would ever trust a husband. I have had some cause to know that husbands can come and go, but your partner had better be somebody you trust more than that. They can't come and go. And so she goes out. This is someone you go out with every night, laying your life in their hands. They're laying their life in your hands. They're supporting you every moment. And you would have to, literally be willing to trust them to the grave and beyond. And I thought, that's about as intimate as any relationship with another human being could be. So the thing is that I couldn't figure out why in her memoir she didn't say anything about what happened to her sniper partner after Sevastopol. She didn't say if he was killed. She didn't say if he survived. And I was just like, why? When he would have been one of the most important people in the world to her. And so I thought, well, maybe there's a reason. Is there some reason why she didn't want to mention him in there? And she mentioned a few things about her partner, that he was Siberian, and that, how closely they worked. And she puts a lot in about, when they worked together, what that looked like. And so I was able to flesh that out, but I thought, I think I need to give a reason why it is that she doesn't mention if this man lived or died, or why it is that he would not be in the memoir any more than he is, considering how important he would have been to her. So there is a reason in the book why it is that this man, she leaves him out so much. And there is a relationship that I built between them. I won't necessarily say if it's romantic or not, which is also based on the fact that there is someone in the real Ludmila's life after the war, no spoiler, who is very important to her. And that's where I got the name Kostya. It's Konstantin Shevelyov. That's all we know about him. This man who was very important to her later after her war was done. We don't know anything about him either. It's a similar thing. She says nothing about him. And it's another instance of here's another man in her life who was very important to her, but she says nothing about him. Why? So I ended up combining two men, the name that we have for this man who was important to her later for various reasons, and the name and the sniper partner. And I pulled them together because I knew these guys would have been important. They would have been almost more important than anyone else. And I pulled them together into one because I wanted to give an explanation for why it is that she says so little. She's keeping a secret in the open, it felt like to me. So that's my reason for it. I'm sorry if it sounded a little cagey. I'm just trying not to give any spoilers, but I really loved writing Kostya because to me, that's a very special thing. And I think that would have been very special to her as well, because she talks quite a lot, very candidly in her memoir about the constant struggles that she was having to push herself through an all-male world. I mean, women in the Red Army, that's 5% women to 95% men. They're constantly outnumbered. She was constantly having these struggles every time she had a new recruits in her platoon, where they're arguing with her about whether she is or is not in charge of them. And, it's like she got really quite, irritated at that. And, she had quite a lot of, jerky superior officers who, really gave her a lot of hell about the fact that they didn't really want a woman in their regiment or their company. And, she had some good ones too, but it's certainly the ones who made her life difficult were quite common. So I thought a man who was willing to take orders from a woman who is a sniper partner, who is his sniper partner, who is more successful and more famous than he is, and who was willing to do that, for over a year in the most dangerous circumstances possible. That seems to me like a very special kind of man. And I want to give him the credit and, the spotlight that he deserves, even if he doesn't have it in Ludmila's life. So again, a little bit of a lengthy answer, but hopefully that answers it for you.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I know that a lot of people are going to be really interested in finding out more about her book and her memoir as well after they read your book. So I don't think we have it at the library, but you can definitely get it through interlibrary loan. So we can do that. We have, this is an interesting question from Joanna. After all the research you have done of women in wartime, what role would you see yourself playing during the war based on your research? And which of the characters in all your books do you relate to personally?
Oh, goodness. I think probably all my characters have a little bit of me in them. I don't know which one is most like me. Maybe less than having a little bit of me in them. What they have is the qualities I'd like to have. I'd love to be as tough as Eve in the Alice Network. I would love to be as brilliant as Beth in the Rose Code. I would love to be as, effortlessly witty and funny as Osla in the Rose Code. I would love to have the kind of endurance that Mila has in the Diamond Eye. So all of these, and I'd love to have that crazy streak, the absolute fearlessness of Nina in the Huntress. So these are all things I wish I did have, and maybe I have a drop of each. I do not think I would be in any particular situation in the job in the war during wartime that would be tremendously important. If there's anything writing the Rose Code taught me, I do not have a brain for code breaking. If there's anything that I'm not sure I would have the nerve to be a spy. You had incredible nerve. You had to have nerves of steel to do that. I'm not a bad shot. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe I could be a sniper. You need a lot of emotional detachment to do that. And maybe as a writer, you're so constantly used to sort of like analyzing everything for story patterns. Maybe that would help me out. I have no clue. So I don't know, but maybe sticking to my strength, maybe I'm in a journalist office writing pieces about patriotism and about wartime recipes to make your ration book stretch longer. Who knows? No clue about that.
Wonderful. All right, so we just have a few minutes left, and I will remind everyone, thank you so much for attending. We do have another author event coming up in June with 2 authors. We have another one at the end of June. And of course, you can email or call your library to pre-order your own copy of The Diamond Die that comes with a signed book plate. So you can do that if you're looking for some good spring and summer reading. And I think we have maybe one other question. And I will say for people, if you came in a bit late, or if you're wanting to review anything, if you've missed any questions, we do record these and we do put them up on YouTube. So you can find any of our author events on whatever library you go to, their YouTube channel. So check it out, and you can see past ones as well. So they're lots of fun. And this is from someone, do you have the support of other female authors of historical fiction, and how do they help you?
I do, and they're wonderful. I have some who are my critique partners who see my manuscripts when nothing, I am not willing to show them to anybody else. That's far more embarrassing than showing up in front of somebody in your underwear, showing your manuscript when it's in a very rough state. So they help me make it better. I have other ones who are friends of mine who we just zing back and forth all day in Google chat groups where that's where we complain about bad reviews, or we, tear our hair about how badly the history or the research is treating us, or we complain, or we, nail bite about our deadlines. John Wheeler asked above, do you have deadlines? Yes, I do. I am in a contract situation. I do have to generally, it's like you will have a book that will be due in, February of next year to turn in, and it'll be coming out in March the following year for publications. Yes, I do have that. But the women friends that I have who are fellow authors are really some of the best that I have. Someone else asked also, how much do I develop the manuscript so it changes from first to last? Well, to answer the next question below, I did not have originally the whole plot line of the assassination. Originally, there was a different climax that it had, and so my crit partners told me, those lovely ladies told me, you need more stakes here. There needs to be bigger stakes. And I realized that Roosevelt had to face a potential coup that nearly could have toppled him from power, that came from inside his own country, from some of the biggest names in American industry. And I thought, well, I wonder if there could have been an assassination attempt that never quite made it to the headlines. And really, when do you plan something like that, if not for when the Russian female sniper is in town to take the blame? So that's where the idea of the assassin character came from. And I really enjoyed writing him, so that he ended up being the person who is creating the mystery and also creating the stakes for the book, because at some point the woman who thinks she is a long way from a battlefield is going to have to fight one last battle. So that answers your question about the assassin, and it also answers the question about quite a lot changes from my first draft to my final draft, even in this book, which actually had less of that than most. So I think I blitzed through the last few.
Oh my goodness, you got everybody's answers done, questions done. Thank you so much for doing this event with us. I know I've enjoyed it. I see chats coming in that other people have saying that they've loved reading your books. And I hope that people who haven't read you will check you out, because there's so many great books to read. So thank you so much. And anytime that you're up in Muskoka, we would all love to have you at all of the Muskoka libraries. So
okay. Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy The Diamond Die if you decide to pick it up.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.